Commander Vex stood motionless on the bridge of the Drachnid warship Eternal Victory, his scaled hands clasped behind his back as he studied the holographic display of the newly conquered human settlement. The orange glow of the burning buildings below cast an eerie light across his metallic armor, highlighting the ancient symbols of conquest etched into its surface. "Status report," he commanded, his voice carrying the weight of countless victories. Lieutenant Kral approached, datapad in hand. "The resistance has been crushed, Commander. Our forces have secured all strategic locations and rounded up the survivors." He hesitated, mandibles clicking nervously. "However, there's something unusual about this capture." Vex turned slowly, his cybernetic eye whirring as it focused on his subordinate. "Explain." "Among the prisoners, we found a significant number of human offspring. Children, they call them. They were hidden in an underground shelter, protected by some of their strongest warriors." The commander's expression remained unchanged, but his auxiliary heart skipped a beat. In 3 centuries of conquest, he had never encountered a species that prioritized protecting their young over defending their strategic assets. It defied military logic. "How many?" he asked. 27, Commander. Ages ranging from what humans consider very young to near maturity. They're being held in Detention Block Alpha." Vex moved to the observation window, watching as shuttles ferried more prisoners to the holding facilities. The Drachnid Empire had conquered 17 species across 3 galactic arms, but humans had proven different. Their tactics were unpredictable, their resistance fierce despite inferior technology. "Show me," he ordered. The detention block was a stark contrast to the bridge's grandeur. Steel walls designed to dampen any attempt at resistance, guards posted at regular intervals, their plasma rifles charged and ready. But as they approached the holding cells, Vex noticed something odd about his soldiers' behavior. They seemed unsettled. The first cell contained adult prisoners, broken, defeated, as expected. The second held the children. Vex expected to find crying, cowering creatures. Instead, he found himself staring at rows of young faces showing everything from curiosity to outright defiance. A small female child, no more than 8 human years, stood at the front of the group. Her dark eyes met his gaze without flinching. "You made a mistake," she said simply. Vex's translator took a moment to process the words. "Explain," he commanded, more intrigued than angry at the child's audacity. "You think capturing us will break them," she gestured to the adult prisoners. "But you don't understand humans at all. We're not your weakness. We're your biggest mistake." Lieutenant Kral shifted uncomfortably beside him. "Commander, perhaps we should." "Be quiet," Vex ordered, his attention fixed on the child. "Continue, human." The girl took a step forward, and Vex noticed other children moving to flank her, as if in formation. Every parent out there now has nothing left to lose. Every soldier knows you're holding their children. You wanted to break their spirit. She smiled, and for the first time in centuries, Commander Vex felt a chill run down his spine. You just gave them a reason to burn your empire to the ground. Other children began to hum, a low, eerie sound that filled the corridor. The guards gripped their weapons tighter, their unease palpable. These were not the actions of defeated prisoners. This was something else entirely. Vex turned abruptly, striding back toward the exit. "Lieutenant, double the guard. Monitor everything they do, everything they say." "Yes, Commander. But what should we do with them?" Vex paused at the doorway, looking back at the cell. The children had arranged themselves in perfect rows, their humming growing louder, more harmonized. The girl still watched him, her expression unchanging. "We've never held human children as prisoners before," he said slowly. "Perhaps we should have asked why." As they left the detention block, the humming followed them, echoing through the corridors like a promise, or perhaps a warning. For the first time since taking command, Commander Vex wondered if victory might come with an unexpected price. In his quarters later, Vex reviewed the surveillance footage. The children had organized themselves into groups, teaching each other, maintaining discipline, sharing food efficiently. They weren't acting like prisoners at all. They were acting like soldiers. Computer, access historical records, he commanded. Search for all instances of human children in warfare. Warning, the computer responded. Data incomplete. Human historical records indicate multiple instances of children significantly impacting military conflicts through indirect means. Psychological warfare, resistance movements, information gathering. Vex shut off the display. Outside his window, the burning settlement had been extinguished, leaving only darkness and stars. Somewhere out there, the human fleet was regrouping, planning. And now they had a purpose, a reason to fight beyond mere survival. He thought of the girl's words, "You made a mistake." For the first time in his long career, Commander Vex wondered if she might be right. The young girl who had confronted Commander Vex was named Sarah Chen, and she had learned more about survival in her 8 years than most adults did in a lifetime. As she sat in the corner of the detention cell, watching the Drachnid guards patrol, she remembered her mother's last words before the invasion. Sometimes the strongest weapon is the mind. Sarah had organized the other children into what she called circles, small groups that could share resources, comfort each other, and most importantly, observe their captors. The youngest ones, barely 5 years old, were placed in the center, protected by the older children. But they all had their roles to play. "They're changing guards again," whispered Marcus, a 10-year-old who had become her second in command. The new ones looked nervous. Sarah nodded, noting how the fresh guards gripped their weapons too tightly, how their eyes darted around the cell more frequently than the veterans. Fear, she could use that. "Begin Operation Lullaby," she whispered back. The message spread through the circles silently, using the hand signals they'd developed. Moments later, the youngest children began singing. It wasn't a militant song or even a sad one. It was a simple children's lullaby about stars and dreams. But in the cold, metallic prison cell, the sweet voices carried an unsettling quality. The new guards shifted uncomfortably. Sarah watched as one of them, a younger Drachnid with lighter scales, actually took a step back from the cell barrier. "Sir," he said to his superior, his translator barely picking up the whisper. "Something feels wrong about this." The superior officer, a grizzled veteran, snarled. "They're just making noise. Ignore it." But they couldn't ignore what came next. As the lullaby continued, the older children began telling stories, loud enough for the guards to hear through their translators. Stories about human history, about children who had changed the course of wars, about the fierce protective instinct of human parents. "My dad is a Marine," one boy said casually. "He told me that nothing in the universe is scarier than a parent protecting their child. I wonder if the Drachnids know that." Sarah suppressed a smile as she saw the younger guard's scales pale slightly. The psychological warfare was working exactly as she had planned. Through the next few days, they escalated their campaign. When high-ranking officers passed by on inspection, the children would fall completely silent, staring with unblinking eyes. During night cycles, they would whisper stories about human vengeance in voices just loud enough to be heard by the guards trying to sleep. But Sarah's masterstroke came during Commander Vex's second visit to the detention block. "Commander," she called out as he passed, causing him to stop mid-stride. "Did you know that in human history, entire empires have fallen because they underestimated children?" Vex turned to face her, his cybernetic eye whirring. "You attempt to manipulate through fear, young human. It will not work." Sarah stood up, walking to the edge of the energy barrier. Behind her, every child in the cell did the same, moving in perfect unison. "It's not manipulation, Commander. It's education. You should ask your guards what they've learned about humans since we arrived. Ask them what they dream about now." Several guards looked away, unable to meet their commander's gaze. Sarah knew the nightmares had already begun, carefully crafted by the stories the children told, the songs they sang, the unnatural unity they displayed. "Your species' psychological tactics are well documented," Vex replied, but Sarah noticed a slight tension in his posture. "Then you know what happens next," Sarah said softly. "First doubt, then fear, then division. We don't need to escape, Commander. We just need to wait." That night, the first guard requested a transfer, claiming stress-induced hallucinations. He swore he could hear children singing even when they were silent, see their eyes watching him in the dark. 2 days later, another guard was found crying in the barracks, talking about dreams where endless waves of human parents came to claim their children, burning everything in their path. Lieutenant Krall approached Commander Vex's quarters with the latest report, his hands shaking slightly. "Sir, morale among the detention block guards has dropped significantly. They're requesting combat duty instead of guard detail. They say they'd rather face adult human soldiers than watch the children anymore." Vex stared at the report, his claws leaving marks on the datapad. "They are children, Lieutenant, simply children." "Yes, sir," Krall replied hesitantly. "But, sir, have you noticed how they move? How they think? It's like they're all part of one organism, one mind. And the stories they tell." He trailed off, mandibles clicking nervously. In the detention block, Sarah gathered her circles close. "They're breaking," she whispered. "Now we wait for the next phase." "What's the next phase?" Marcus asked. Sarah smiled, a smile that would have looked more at home on a hardened warrior than a child. "Now we wait for the adults to remind the Drachnids why taking their children was the worst mistake they could have made." Through the ship's hull, distant explosions could be heard, the first signs of the human counterattack beginning. The children's song grew louder, drowning out the sound of battle stations being called. The war was about to enter a new phase, and the children were ready to play their part. Lieutenant Krall paced in his quarters, the children's songs echoing in his mind even through the soundproofed walls. 3 more guards had requested transfers today, and one had been found catatonic, muttering about the eyes that never sleep. The Drachnid Empire had faced countless enemies across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared them for this. "Lieutenant," his communicator crackled, "your presence is required in the detention block. Immediately." When Krall arrived, he found chaos. A guard was pressed against the wall, his weapon dropped at his feet, while Commander Vex stood watching the children's cell with an intensity that made his scales ripple. "Report," Vex demanded, not taking his eyes off the cell. "Sir," the guard's voice trembled. They know things they couldn't possibly know. The little one, she knew about my clutchmate on Drachnid Prime. She knew his name." Inside the cell, Sarah Chen sat cross-legged, surrounded by her circles of children. They were all humming that same haunting melody, but their eyes were fixed on the guards with an awareness that seemed to pierce through armor and scales. "Your brother's Extal," Sarah said clearly, her voice carrying through the barrier. "He's worried about you. Thinks this assignment is changing you. He's right, isn't he?" The guard's breathing became erratic. How could you know that?" Sarah's smile was gentle, but her eyes remained steel-hard. "We know many things. We see the cracks in your armor, the doubt in your hearts. We hear your whispered fears in the night shifts. We are children of humanity, and we carry its strength." Commander Vex stepped forward. "Enough of these games. Your psychological warfare may work on common soldiers, but not on you, Commander." Sarah interrupted. "Then why do you keep coming back to our cell? Why do you watch the security feeds for hours, trying to understand? We see you too, Commander. We see your fear." For the first time in his career, Krall watched his commander take an involuntary step backward. The other children had stopped humming, and the silence was somehow worse than their songs. "The human fleet is coming," Sarah continued, her voice now barely above a whisper. "Not just soldiers, but parents. Do you know what human parents are capable of when their children are in danger? Your empire has never faced anything like it." As if on cue, the ship's alarms began to blare. Multiple contacts detected. A voice announced over the intercom. "Human vessels emerging from hyperspace." How did they know? Krell whispered. How could they have known where to find us? Sarah stood, the other children rising with her in perfect synchronization. We told them, she said simply. Every song we sang, every story we told. They were messages. Our parents taught us codes hidden in nursery rhymes, coordinates masked as children's games. We've been broadcasting our location since the moment you brought us aboard. Commander Vex's cybernetic eye whirred frantically as he processed this information. Impossible. Our communications are shielded. Are they? Sarah asked. Or did you just assume we couldn't possibly be a threat? That's the thing about humans, Commander. We teach our children to be more than just children. We teach them to be survivors. The ship rocked with the first impact of human weapons. Through the hull, they could hear the distinctive sound of boarding pods attaching themselves to the outer plating. Fall back to battle stations, Vex ordered, but Krell could see the tremor in his commander's hands. All guards, prepare for. It's too late, Sarah interrupted. Your empire made 3 mistakes. First, you underestimated human children. Second, you gave us exactly what we needed, an audience for our messages. And third, she paused, her smile growing wider as explosion sounds grew closer. You put all of us in the same cell. The lights flickered, and in that moment of darkness, every child in the cell began singing again. Not a lullaby this time, but a battle hymn. The sound filled the corridor, drowning out the alarms, the explosions, even the sounds of approaching combat. Lieutenant, Vex's voice was barely steady. Execute emergency protocol. But Krell wasn't listening anymore. He was watching the children, their faces illuminated by the flickering lights, their voices rising in perfect harmony. They weren't prisoners waiting to be rescued. They were weapons that had been perfectly placed exactly where they needed to be. The ship shuddered again, and through the hull came the unmistakable sound of human breaching charges. The rescue wasn't coming. It was already here. And in that moment, as Sarah Chen's battle hymn reached its crescendo, Lieutenant Krell finally understood. The Drachnid Empire hadn't captured human children. The children had captured them. Major Diana Reeves had never seen anything like it in her 20 years of military service. The Drachnid warship's internal defenses were in chaos, with enemy soldiers breaking formation, some even dropping their weapons at the sight of the human assault team. The psychological warfare conducted by the children had worked better than anyone could have anticipated. Team Alpha, breach point secured, her comm crackled. You won't believe this, Major. Some of the guards are surrendering without a fight. They're terrified. Diana allowed herself a grim smile as she led her team through the twisted corridors. Sarah Chen, her best friend's daughter, had done exactly what they'd trained for, though Diana doubted anyone had expected the plan to work quite so perfectly. Remember, she transmitted to all teams, primary objective is child extraction. Secondary objective is Commander Vex. He doesn't leave this ship. The Drachnid warship shuddered as another explosion rocked its frame. Through the smoke and chaos, Diana could hear it, the battle hymn of the children, growing louder as they approached the detention block. The sound sent chills down her spine, even knowing it was coming from allies. Contact front, her point man called out. A group of Drachnid soldiers appeared around the corner, but their formation was sloppy, their weapons trembling in their hands. Stop, one of them called out in translated speech. The children, they told us you would come. They said you would give us one chance to stand down. Diana raised her hand, halting her team's advance. They were right. Stand down, and you live. Resist. She let the threat hang in the air. The Drachnid soldiers looked at each other, their scales shifting colors in what Diana recognized as their species' sign of fear. Without another word, they placed their weapons on the ground and stepped aside. Smart choice, Diana said as she led her team past them. They're just children, aren't they? Funny how scary that thought becomes when you're on the wrong side of human nature. The detention block was ahead, and the battle hymn had reached a fever pitch. Diana could see Commander Vex through the smoke, barking orders at his increasingly reluctant troops. Lieutenant Krell stood beside him, but his weapon was pointed at the ground, his posture defeated. "Commander Vex," Diana's voice boomed through the corridor. "Surrender now, and this ends without further bloodshed." Vex spun around, his cybernetic eye glowing fiercely in the haze. "You think you've won. You think your psychological tricks and parents' fury make you invincible." "No," Diana replied calmly, advancing with her team. "We just understand something you never will. Every human child carries within them the collective strength of our species. When you took them, you didn't capture prisoners. You captured the very essence of humanity's will to survive." Inside the cell, Sarah Chen stood at the barrier's edge, her small frame somehow dominating the space. The other children stood with her, their songs merging into a single powerful voice that seemed to make the very air vibrate. "I told you they would come," Sarah said to Vex, her voice carrying clearly despite the chaos. "I told you what parents would do for their children. Was it worth it, Commander? Was your victory worth watching your empire's greatest warship fall to a group of human children?" Vex raised his weapon, but his hand was shaking. "You're lying. This is impossible. Children cannot." "Cannot what?" Diana interrupted. "Cannot think. Cannot plan. Cannot fight back. That's why you lost before you even began, Commander. You never understood what human children are capable of." The remaining Drachnid guards were backing away, some dropping their weapons, others simply fleeing. Lieutenant Krell had sunk to his knees, his mandibles clicking rapidly in what Diana recognized as their species' version of hysterical laughter. "Commander," Krell's voice was barely a whisper. "The children, they weren't our prisoners. We were theirs, all this time." Diana signaled her teams to move forward. "Last chance, Commander. Surrender, and you'll be treated according to galactic law. Resist, and—" she glanced at Sarah, who smiled that unnervingly adult smile, "and you'll learn firsthand why taking human children was the last mistake your empire will ever make," Sarah finished. Vex looked around at his crumbling command, at the human soldiers advancing with unwavering determination, at the children whose songs had broken the will of his strongest warriors. His cybernetic eye flickered once, twice, and then went dark. The mighty commander of the Drachnid Empire dropped his weapon and fell to his knees. The war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but as Diana watched Sarah and the other children walk out of their cell, heads held high, still singing their battle hymn, she knew something had fundamentally changed in the galaxy. The Drachnids had wanted to break humanity's spirit by taking its children. Instead, they had learned why human children were the most dangerous force in the universe, because they carried within them not just humanity's future, but its unbreakable will to survive. In the aftermath of the Drachnid warship's capture, Commander Vex sat in his own detention cell, watching as human forces systematically dismantled his command. The mighty eternal victory, pride of the Drachnid fleet, had fallen not to superior firepower or tactical brilliance, but to the songs of children. Through his cell's viewport, he could see Sarah Chen and the other children being reunited with their parents. The scenes of reunion were almost too much to bear. Fierce warriors breaking down in tears, hardened soldiers dropping to their knees to embrace their children. It was a display of emotion that would have been seen as weakness in Drachnid culture, yet Vex could no longer deny its power. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Lieutenant Krell's voice came from the adjacent cell. "What we never understood about them." Vex turned to his former subordinate, noting how the younger Drachnid scales had lost their luster. "What we never understood, Lieutenant. Love, Commander. Not just the concept. We understood that. But its strength, its ability to turn children into warriors and parents into unstoppable forces. We never stood a chance." Major Diana Reeves approached their cells, Sarah Chen walking beside her. The child who had orchestrated their downfall looked different now, smaller, more like the 8-year-old she was, yet her eyes retained that unsettling wisdom. "Commander Vex," Diana spoke formally, "the human fleet has recovered all children and adult prisoners. Your ship is under our control, and your Empire's High Command has received our terms." "Terms?" Vex's voice was hollow. "You expect the Drachnid Empire to negotiate with the species that turned your greatest warship into a playground?" Sarah interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Yes, we do. Because now you understand what happens when you threaten our children." Diana placed a hand on Sarah's shoulder. "The terms are simple. The Drachnid Empire will withdraw from all human territories. You will acknowledge human space as sovereign and independent. And most importantly, you will never again target human civilians, especially children." "And if we refuse?" Vex asked, though he already knew the answer. Sarah stepped closer to his cell. "Then every child in human space will learn our songs. Every nursery rhyme will carry battle codes. Every playground will become a training ground. You thought we were strong because we were desperate. No, Commander. We were strong because this is what humanity has always been. A species that turns its greatest vulnerability into its greatest strength." Vex looked at the child before him, remembering their first meeting in the detention block. How blind he had been, thinking he could break humanity's spirit by taking its young. Instead, he had given them exactly what they needed, a reason to show the galaxy why humans were different. "Your Empire's greatest weakness," Sarah continued, "is that you see children as a vulnerability to be protected. We see them as the future to be prepared. Every human child knows the stories, the codes, the songs. We're not just children, Commander. We're humanity's promise that we will never be conquered." Diana stepped forward. "The terms have already been accepted by your High Command. They understood the implications better than you did. This war is over." As they turned to leave, Vex found his voice one last time. "Wait," he called out. "Tell me, child, was it all planned? From the moment we took you?" Sarah looked back, and for a moment, Vex saw in her eyes the same fire he'd seen in that first confrontation. "We're human children, Commander. We're taught from birth how to turn capture into victory, fear into strength, and songs into weapons. You didn't just lose a battle. You helped us teach the galaxy why humanity's children are its greatest asset." After they left, Vex sat in silence, watching as human ships secured the sector. The songs had stopped, but he could still hear them in his mind. The lullabies that had broken his soldier's will, the battle hymns that had announced humanity's arrival. "Lieutenant," he spoke softly to Krau. "Yes, Commander. Send a message to all Drachnid worlds. Tell them why we really lost this war. Tell them about the children who sang an empire to its knees." As the message was transmitted across Drachnid space, a new legend was born, not of military might or technological superiority, but of human children who turned their captivity into triumph, and of an empire that learned too late why humanity's greatest strength was not in its weapons, but in its youth. In the years that followed, Drachnid children would ask their parents about the humans who sang songs of victory and defeat, and Drachnid warriors would warn each other never to underestimate even the smallest human child. For in them burned the indomitable spirit of their species, a spirit that could turn prison cells into strongholds and lullabies into weapons of war. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity's children were not its weakness. They were its ultimate defense,